do la parola, spero di leggere giusto, a Barbara Veale Smith, che ci parlerà, giusto? Ok, della pace, che la pace è veramente possibile, andando oltre verso, in ogni caso, incontra l'essere umano. Barbara è una master in educazione, arriva, pensate, dall'Oregon per essere qui con noi in questo grande abbraccio della psicosintesi, arriva esattamente da Bend e coaching in psicosintesi, quindi adesso le do la parola e la ringrazio.
Good morning. It's a real pleasure to be here with you all, and I'm very grateful to have this opportunity and so inspired by this conference. And I wanted to share 3 reasons why I'm really here in Italy. When I was at the North American conference in last summer, one of my teachers, Dee Furman, I spoke with her, and I am relatively new to psychosynthesis, and I said, you know, I'm still not really sure I belong here. And I said, you know, I come from more of the spiritual disciplines than the psychological side, and I hear a lot spoken of will, but not as much around contentless awareness. And so I'm wondering if this is my home in a professional sense. And she encouraged me to write a proposal for Italy. And she said, why don't you write something and see if it's accepted? And so I want to thank Dee for encouraging me and for the organizers for their choice to honor this topic of peace. So the second reason I'm here is this call that I heard on the internet. On the website for the Institute, the call says we will reflect on the evolution of humanity and the contribution that psychosynthesis can offer to that evolution. In their introduction, the conveners affirm that we will know how to dialogue and from our multiplicity move towards unity with the precious quality of humility, with the courage to dream truths not as yet manifest, aware of being born to the world to complete our existence as unique, original souls, and to participate in the realization of a fully humane society. Wow, I was inspired. I wanted to be part of a group of colleagues who held such a vision. And my words this morning are intended to contribute to this vital dialogue and to provide you with an experience of both our multiplicity and our unity, or what I call very simply, the both and of human being. And I mentioned I had 3 reasons for being here. The third reason is my mom. And although she's not pictured, she's here because she's clearly on the other side of the camera, right? She's taking a photo of my dad, and I'm sitting in his lap. I'm the blonde who can't take her eyes off the book. Some things haven't changed. And my sister to the right is Susan, and I want to speak about her for a moment, and the sister on the far left is named Kathy. And my mom was a very simple woman. She was very wise and quite direct. And so one day we were playing together in the house, my sister Susan and myself, and we weren't getting along. We were bickering and fighting and not very nice to one another. So I said to my mom, could I please go down the street and play with my friend? And my mom said, no, you can go in the backyard, and when you learn to play with your sister nicely, then we'll talk about your friends. So it was a very powerful lesson. It led to a lifelong desire to know and to live that kind of peace, where peace began at home, in the love of the family, in the love of the heart, with those that we know. right? So I could dream all the great vision and dreams about the world that I wanted, but I recognized early on if I couldn't love and be close to those who were close to me, then I was in trouble. So my message this morning is also that simple. I'm suggesting that peace is really possible. And you might be wondering, why does she think peace is really possible? Isn't the world in a great state of challenge on so many levels? It certainly is. But I still maintain that peace is really possible because I know there's a peace that is already and always here, and it's here right now. And as we experience that peace together this morning, my hope is that our collective experience will bring more fully into reality the universal peace that so many who are gathered here affirm. Because as the contemporary spiritual teacher Thich Nhat Hanh asserts, peace in oneself, peace in the world. And he writes further, if we transform our individual consciousness, we begin the process of changing the collective consciousness. Transforming the world's consciousness is not possible without personal change. The collective is made of the individual, and the individual is made of the collective. And each and every individual has a direct effect on the collective consciousness. And so one of the first steps that can be taken, of course, to transform both our individual and the collective consciousness is to look at our sense of separation. This is how I think of ego and egoic consciousness. It's that is operating when no awareness has been brought forward and there is complete identification with the contents of I as a personal self. And I'm not a graphic artist by any stretch, but in this slide I'm attempting to show that how I envision this ego is as an elevation on top of the egg. And this to me is a way to represent the movement of ego which says, look at me. Although some people, their egos say, don't look too much at me. So we have differences, of course. But the commonality, I think, in egoic movement is a quality of separation. One experiences a person themselves as identified with their content exclusively. And of course, as psychosynthetic work can be undertaken and moves forward, that sense of egoic self can diminish. And as that's happening, of course, awareness is increasing. And there's this experience of a greater understanding. What is necessary for this transformation? And for me, it always begins with attention. As I really trust that Asa Jolie noted, it's a universal truth that what we give our attention to is activated, right? And so in my experience now in some teaching that I've been doing with some college and post-college students, I'm finding that the word awareness is not accessible, as accessible to them as the word attention. And so in my experience, I'm using the words interchangeably, and attention for me is the flashlight form of awareness, whereas the contentless awareness, I think, more of a floodlight. So a flashlight, very directed, and the floodlight more open, but similar, actually same, right? So you'll hear me this morning using attention and awareness in an interchangeable way, and this is my experience at this point. I said in the beginning that peace is really possible, and that we have that experience together. So I want to invite you now to look with a fresh perspective, as if with beginner eyes, right? So many of you are veterans in psychosynthesis, have done so much wonderful work, and so I'm asking you to imagine as if you are a beginner today, and to look with me at what are actually the qualities of awareness. And to do that, I would like to guide you a little bit in an experiment here, looking directly at the experience of contentless awareness. My sense is so often we hear the words, the witness, as if it's far off and separate. And the guiding I'd like to do is to bring that closer, bring that experience more into our interior. And I want to experience this with you and trust, though, that you are your own authority. There's no right or wrong answers here. It's a guided experience for you to consider. So if you're interested and you want to just relax a little bit more in your chair, feel free to close your eyes if that's comfortable. And I'll invite the bell to sound in a moment as we relax in here. And as you relax, and as I relax, and we feel the experience of being here, arriving fully, bringing with us all that is possible in this moment. And feel yourself held by the earth and by the immediate experience of your chair. And I invite you now to open your attention globally, to feel the space in the room, hear the sounds around us, some light chatter, slight noise of a fan in the background. And open to the space that's in the room. Notice the space between you and the walls on the right side of you and on the left side of you. Notice the space above you and below you, to the front of you and to the back of you. Notice the space, and notice that space itself is like contentless awareness. Space is clearly here, but it has no content. And in a similar way, we can experience attention or our awareness right now as real and palpable, even though it's invisible. We can feel its presence, and we would notice it in its absence. And as you continue to notice what's noticing everything, I'm going to ask you a few questions. And again, I invite you to be your own authority. And as you look for yourself and see, while we are all clearly human people who have bodies with an age, does awareness itself have an age? You may remember awareness as being present for your whole life, always here, gently present. But does the awareness itself get older as your body becomes older? Awareness may be what notices the passing of time, but does it live in time itself? Or is it ever present to the time and the timeless? Awareness notices everything. Awareness notices gender, notices all the ways that humans experience themselves. But does awareness itself have a gender? And in this room together, we are many nationalities from many different countries. But does the awareness itself have a nationality? Does awareness push anything away or try to pull anything toward itself? Clearly there is an experience of a person who has preferences, some things you like and some things you don't like, but does the awareness itself have preferences? Or is it simply accepting, noticing, always here, unconditional, welcoming all of your conditioning, all that we experience in our humanness. Even when we go to sleep at night, awareness is still noticing. Because when you wake up in the morning, the awareness that never sleeps, notice whether you had a restful sleep or a fitful sleep. It's awake always. All feelings, thoughts, and sensations are noticed by and held in the loving presence of this contentless space, this peace, this equanimity that is here right now. Contentless awareness is equally meeting all of our human experience, joy and fear, sadness and laughter, all of the range of the human experience, welcomed by this very intimate, contentless awareness. And please come back into the room now, very gently remaining in this peace that's always here and can never not be here. And as I said, there's something noticing. And I'm sorry I don't have the translation up on this slide, but the slide was a last-minute inspiration as I walked to this lovely property, and this rose just spoke to me and called out. And then there was this recognition. What notices the rose? What sees? So joy and fear, able to be right next to one another. And as we went through, this is a summary of what we experienced together. This amazing spaciousness, unconditional acceptance, very palpable, never not here. And if I turned away from you and I wasn't paying attention, you'd notice, right? Attention can be felt in its presence and clearly in its absence. And the last is very important to me, always here and always now. I don't experience it as higher, right, or lower, it's just right here, right, always available. And so again, sometimes we can get the feeling that these beautiful qualities of the divine, the qualities of the transpersonal, might be just for a once-in-a-while experience, and then we come back to the humdrum, and yet my experience is it's always here, always available. It's just being. It's simply what is, it's here, and being. And so just to continue a little bit with our experiment about awareness, I'm going to invite you now into a very simple and short experiment. And there's no need to get up and move around, but if you are next to someone and you can easily turn to someone without speaking, I invite you in a moment to turn and look at the person who's sitting next to you. If you're at the end of a row or you're not next to someone, don't move. Just imagine as I guide this very brief experience. Okay? So if you could turn to someone if you're close by now, and then I will start. And just turn and look without speaking into the eyes of this human being, this precious person next to you. And as you look into the eyes of this person, the part of you that's aware of the person you're looking at, is that awareness itself the same awareness that's looking at you? In other words, is there a boundary to attention or awareness? And if you need to, even put your hand out and try to feel, is there a boundary there? Is a place where that ends and begins? See if you can find an edge. Okay, great. And then just simply come back now to the group and just let's feel that experience, right? So while there is clearly a sense of our personal space, right? my invitation to you is to look and see if this is not true, that what sees through your eyes sees through the eyes of every living being. That in a particular way, this very powerful experience about contentless awareness being the space in which we are all held and the place in which there actually is no boundary. There is already a unity here before we go looking for it. We didn't create it, we just experienced it together, right? So isn't that amazing? It's quite stunning. So where's unity? It's right here, right? It's right here. It's holding the totality right in this moment. Attention knows what you're feeling as you're listening to me, and it knows the thoughts that may be arising either in affirmation or rebuttal to what you're hearing. But the attention itself that notices is not itself separate from everything that's noticed, nor is it agreeing with or disagreeing with what's here. It simply is. It simply accepts and receives. And some spiritual teachers call this the high indifference, right? So that's here, that's aware of everything. And I even feel it though, and I'm going to suggest to you to consider it, I even experience it as unconditional love. Something's here, completely accepting. It for me is the love of the divine for the beloved, the love of the beloved for the divine. And this can be quite a stunning discovery. But then of course there's the human, right? There's being, never not here, and then there's this experience of our humanness. Unique, each one. In this moment, clearly I'm a female figure, right? I'm wearing glasses. I have preferences. I like the color pink. And in this moment, I still feel a little nervous. I'm curious what you're thinking about, right? So it's all very human, right? This dimension of being that's here, right? And as I stand here, yet there's also that part of me, and I'll just step over for a moment. Here, we could say the part of me that's noticing the humanness, they're right here, side by side, never separate, right? So the uniqueness and the unity, side by side, always. Okay? So, we might question then, if this is true, what I'm suggesting, and if this eternal presence that is peace itself is always here, why can't we get along with each other sometimes? What's going on? I'm going to invite you to do another little experiment. In a moment, in your mind, or if you'd like on paper, I'm going to ask you to jot down just 2 or 3 qualities that you most identify with. In other words, as you think about yourself, what do you claim when you think, this is me, right? And for each quality that you write down, if you're writing or in your mind's eye on the left side, I'd invite you also just to put its opposite on the right. This is what you tell yourself, this is not me, I'm not like that. And I'll show you an example of 3 qualities that I identify with. So I see myself as honest. And so if I were writing, I'd write down honest, and on the right side, the opposite of that, dishonest. I also think of myself as a kind person, and so on the other side, unkind. And I think of myself as bright, smart, I have intelligence, some gifts around being skillful. And so the opposite of that, unskillful. And so these are qualities that we perhaps identify with, and yours might be quite different, might be similar, who knows. So I'm going to ask now that we just pause for a moment and reflect, just again quietly to yourself or on paper if that's helpful. And just call to mind a few qualities that you identify with. So hopefully you just get a taste of this. It's not a long exercise, just a taste. Now think for a moment about the kind of things that most easily upset you, right? Just off the top of your head. And if you are writing, you can think about just 1 or 2 sentences, right? Just something that's a kind of a common trigger, we could say. I don't know if that's a word that's easily translatable, right? Common upset, you might get even really reactive, right? Something really gets you going, okay? So what easily upsets you, and just call to mind that now for a moment again. And I'll give this experience for myself because I value the qualities that I told you about, honesty and kindness, right? So when somebody lies, I can be upset inside. When someone's untrue with me, or they're unkind and they don't value what I'm offering, right? So that would be my common experience of my upset, right? So just hold that in your mind, your own upset. And I'll walk through this because I want to make sure we have time to feel this. So you can notice then the things that upset me are those things that are on the side that I don't identify with, right? Make sense? So dishonesty, unskillful, and unkind. And so it's quite interesting to me, and maybe you noticed this too if you thought about it with me, that those qualities map, right, to what's disowned. The things that typically trigger us are going to map to what we've disowned, and I'll tell you again personally, they become a map to how we will relate to another in a very reactive way if we're not conscious about that. So again, speaking about myself, because I value those qualities that I mentioned, when I'm upset and I don't feel heard and understood, guess what? I become unkind. I might say ugly things to people that I love. Right? I'm not proud of that, but it's what happens sometimes. Okay? And when I do that, I can see that I'm not being very skillful. Right? So you see how my whole, what I hold to be myself then becomes not only what's projected out that I'm disowning, but it also becomes the way that I behave when I'm triggered, when I'm reactive. Okay? So, why is peace elusive? My suggestion to you this morning, it's elusive because of this split. Okay? How we perceive ourselves and how we perceive the other. And how we hold that as an image. In our story about ourselves or in our story about another, we perceive them in a certain way, and we might even feel so triggered that sometimes it literally feels like life or death. I have to tell you what's important and what's true, and it feels like I might die if I don't really communicate this to you, right? It's that kind of, and we're being triggered down in the reptilian brain and the emotional center. We kind of use this image to talk about the brainstem here and the reptilian brain and the emotional center, and we literally flip our lid, right? And so we're reactive. Instead of coming from our prefrontal cortex, our more adaptive, able to understand what's happening brain, we kind of lose it, right? So again, this is my suggestion. So what's the antidote? You might wonder, of course, in a group like this, what would we think of but synthesis? Because if we identify only with the left side as my image of myself, or only on the right, then there's a split, and the coming together is these embrace of the two qualities on either side. To recognize that in my humanity, I can own all of it. The truth is, sometimes I'm kind and sometimes I'm not, and sometimes I'm honest, and when I feel triggered, and if I'm really feeling like my life's at stake, I might even lie and try and manipulate it so I can feel right? So that's the truth, okay? So as we move along, I'm suggesting that this idea of self-image is like the Uber self-personality, and that it's contentless awareness that holds the key to this harmonization of the opposites. Right? When we can bring it all back to this peace that's already here that we experience together, and we can rest in that even for a moment, and we take a breath, something else is available to us. And how do we get there? So, spiritual experience. Last night, Kenneth Sorensen was speaking, and he mentioned the true possibilities of this moment in time, to wake up to one's true nature, as is happening all over the world. I was drawn to psychosynthesis because in it I saw a map of what I'd already directly experienced in terms of disidentification and identification in a spiritual framework. And I also sensed that this framework can be of benefit to people like me who had not only gotten to the doorway of the great mystery, but who had had the deep clarity of the nature of absolute reality, otherwise known as consciousness or self. But the actual living embodiment of what has been realized and what is realized for others who are on that path may still be ever unfolding. And psychosynthesis can support that unfolding. In other words, without a shadow of a doubt, if we know the truth that we're told in a conceptual way, but we know that in our heart now, and we know that as our experience, and yet in spite of that knowing there's a small-mindedness or a place of reactivity, there's a difficulty. And psychosynthesis can ameliorate that split. Because here in psychosynthesis, of course, as you all know, we have a system for identifying what can feel at times like autonomous aspects of oneself, acting in relative opposition with one another, and in relative opposition or even defiance of the true nature of all beings, this contentless awareness that we are. So once again, where do we go? There's the human, everything that is, the me and the not me, what we experience as personal. And then there's being, and we might think of them as the polarity, being that is not a thing, the no thing that is not a thing, right? And yet here present, contentless awareness, pure consciousness and love. And what is the synthesis? The willingness to become ever evolving as our humanity, and the willingness to be, to live the truth of our being, this that is contentless and spacious and loving, honoring the both and, not holding on to one polarity or the other. Because in spiritual experience, sometimes people can experience the truth of no thing, bliss, peace, and feel like, whoa, everything's fine. And it's not really fine because they're yelling at their spouse, or, right? And so how do we come in, human and being? So I'll finish up the last slide. We must be willing to identify with all of the potential content, right? The both and. From the space of contentless awareness. And as we do that, a deep well can open up. So again, as I envision the egg, there's that diminishment of egoic self, but there's always a sense of self. I think this is a misunderstanding, that people think that somehow the I is completely disappeared and everything's great. My experience and others I've seen is that the perfume of I is always there, a sense of self, right? But this deep well opens and you know yourself in the totality, and through that totality, love comes up through the well that is accessing all that we are, and the love moves as the self, as the I, right? They come together in that supreme synthesis, and one sees each other everywhere you go, no separation. So you know this completely and fully, not better than, not other than, but in the totality. And right here, this will to identify and disidentify, my suggestion is that it comes from consciousness itself. While it may be experienced at some times like a separate I that has will, that if we really look carefully, that the supreme synthesis can only be a coming up from self itself, in the I. Because if there are not two, as Asajoli says, there are not two selves, there is self and I, then the will cannot be separated out in a me that somehow disappears at some time. It's always here, but the experience can be of separation because we have that split. Okay? So in the Buddhist tradition, that would be thought of as the form and the formless, and in the Christian tradition, the kingdom is here, but not yet. So both and. Okay? And Asajoli, I leave you with his beautiful words. So thank you so much. Blessings.